You know, when you hear the phrase literary criticism, what comes to mind? Probably dusty old books and stuffy classrooms, right? But what if we reframe that? Think of it less like a class and more like a toolbox, a really powerful, always growing set of tools that lets you see right into the heart of the stories you love. It's not about finding the one right answer. It's about learning how to ask some really cool new questions.
I mean, think about it. You finish a great movie, you turn to your friend and you're like, wow, that was so obviously about the hero's struggle with his father. And your friend just looks at you and goes, what? No way, it was a critique of corporate greed. You've been there, right? We all have. Well, that argument, that friendly debate over what a story is really trying to say, that's the starting point for this whole conversation.
So, what is literary criticism, officially? Well, it's basically the structured, systematic way we have that argument. Sure, interpretation is at the core of it, but it actually goes a little deeper. It's also about judging quality and, maybe more importantly, investigating the whole ecosystem of a story. You know, how it got made, why it got made, and how we, the audience, actually experience it. It's the framework for our analysis.
To really understand the tools we have today, we've got to go way back to the very first tools that were ever made. And that takes us to ancient Greece, to the original intellectual showdown over what art is even for, a clash between a legendary teacher and his most brilliant student.
So this is the debate that started it all. In one corner, you have Plato, and for him, art is just dangerous. He sees it as a cheap knockoff of reality, which is already a knockoff of some perfect, ideal truth. He thought it just riled people up and inflamed their irrational emotions, so poets, yeah, they should be banished. But then, in the other corner, his student Aristotle comes back swinging. He argues, hold on, imitation is how we learn. He says that art, especially a good tragedy, doesn't just inflame our emotions, it gives us catharsis, a kind of purging that actually helps us regulate feelings like pity and fear. It makes us better people. This one debate basically set the terms for the next 2,000 years.
Now, after that initial showdown, the conversation obviously didn't just stop. Over hundreds and hundreds of years, the focus of criticism began to pivot. It started moving away from a search for some external divine truth and started looking inward, into our own messy human world.
And you can see that massive shift right here on this timeline. For a solid 1,000 years during the medieval era, pretty much all literature was seen through a religious lens. Critics were basically looking for clues to God's plan in every story. Then, boom, the Renaissance rediscovers Aristotle, and suddenly the focus is on human greatness. The neoclassical era that followed got really obsessed with rules and order. But then comes the big one, the Romantic era. The whole pendulum just swings dramatically inward, and suddenly it's all about the individual author and the reader's personal feelings.
And if you need one quote to perfectly capture that shift, this is it. William Wordsworth's definition of poetry. All of a sudden, poetry isn't about God's truth or society's rules anymore. No, it's about a personal, emotional explosion from inside the artist. The author's inner world just became the main event, and that, right there, was a total revolution in how we think about art. So if the Romantic era was a revolution, then the 20th century was like a big bang. That toolbox we've been talking about just exploded, filling up with dozens of new, super specialized, and often conflicting tools. Each one was designed to take a story apart in a completely different way. Let's check out some of the biggest new tools that showed up. Think of each row here as a different pair of glasses. You can pop on your new critic glasses, and all you're focusing on are the words on the page. Or you could swap them out for psychoanalytic glasses and start hunting for the author's hidden unconscious desires. Put on the Marxist glasses, and suddenly class struggle is all you can see. Each lens completely changes what you're looking for by asking a totally different question.
Okay, let's zoom in on that first one. New criticism was hugely influential for a long time. These guys basically said, stop trying to guess what the author was thinking and stop worrying about how the poem makes you feel. The only thing that matters are the words themselves and how they all work together as a neat, self-contained object. This is actually where the whole idea of close reading comes from, a skill a lot of us probably learned in school.
And then, just to make things really interesting, deconstruction came along. And it took that idea of close reading and kind of turned it on its head. Deconstructionists argued that if you look closely enough at any text, you'll find that language itself is this super slippery, unstable thing. A text is always accidentally saying things it doesn't mean to, constantly tripping over itself and undermining its own supposed message. It's a tool for finding the chaos hiding just beneath the surface of order. The next major addition to our toolbox shifted the focus yet again. These newer theories weren't just about how a text is built, they were explicitly political. They started asking some really urgent questions about who gets to tell the stories in our culture, and maybe more importantly, whose stories never get told at all.
So feminist criticism, for example, isn't just one single idea. It's more like a mode of inquiry. It asks these crucial questions, like how are gender roles being portrayed in this story? Does the text reveal the assumptions of a patriarchal system? And, a big one, why has the list of great books, the literary canon, been so dominated by men for so long?
And in a similar vein, post-colonial criticism gives us a lens to analyze the massive literary fallout of colonialism. It asks how Western literature often created these distorted, caricatured images of other cultures, which kind of made imperialism seem natural or even necessary. And most importantly, it tries to recover the voices of the colonized, the subaltern, as they're called, whose perspectives were basically erased from the history books.
Queer theory pushes all this even further. It challenges the very idea of stable identities. A queer theorist looks at a text to find all the places where it messes with our fixed ideas about gender and sexuality. It hunts for hidden desires and explores this really cool idea that identity isn't something we are, but something we do, like a performance we're all putting on every single day. Which brings us to the very newest tools in the box, and these don't come from philosophy, they come from computer science. Digital humanities uses raw computing power to analyze literature on a scale that's just mind-boggling. We can use stylometry to analyze an author's style so precisely we can figure out who wrote anonymous works, or we can do something called distant reading, analyzing thousands of books at once to spot huge historical trends that no single human could ever hope to see. Okay, so we have this huge, crowded, amazing toolbox. But what's the point, right? How does it actually work when you apply it? Well, let's find out. We're going to take one of the most famous American novels ever, The Great Gatsby, and quickly look at it through 4 of these very different critical lenses. First up, let's put on our Marxist glasses. When we do, the novel just snaps into focus as a story about class and money. That grim industrial wasteland, the Valley of Ashes, it's not just a gloomy setting. It's the literal waste product of the crazy wealth in West Egg. And Gatsby's incredible mansion, it's not a home. It's a commodity, a product he's using to try and buy his way into the upper class. All right, let's swap those out for a feminist lens. Now our focus shifts to the characters, especially Daisy. Remember when she says she hopes her daughter will be a beautiful little fool? A feminist critic sees that as this heartbreaking admission of the very limited roles available to women in that world. Tom Buchanan's behavior isn't just him being an arrogant jerk. It's the embodiment of patriarchal power and control. Okay, now for the queer lens. And the focus shifts again, this time to our narrator, Nick. A queer reading would pay super close attention to the way Nick describes Gatsby, seeing it not as just friendship, but as a kind of infatuation or desire. And that weird short scene when Nick ends up half-dressed in Mr. McKee's bedroom, for a queer theorist, that is not a throwaway moment. It's a huge clue to Nick's own suppressed identity. And finally, let's try on a newer tool, echo-criticism. This lens makes us look at the physical world of the novel. We contrast Nick's modest, kind of ragged lawn with Gatsby's perfectly manicured estate, and we see how the landscape itself reflects class divides. The constant presence of cars, which of course culminates in a fatal accident, becomes a symbol of a wasteful, unsustainable way of life. So what's the big takeaway from all this? It's that stories don't just have one simple meaning sitting there on the surface. Their true richness, all those unspoken and unintended meanings, they only really come to life when a whole community of readers gets to work on them with all these different tools. Criticism is a team sport. It's a collaborative act of discovery.
Ultimately, criticism isn't some parasite feeding on literature. It's the very oxygen that keeps it alive and breathing. It's the ongoing conversation that allows old books to speak to new generations, and it ensures that our shared culture continues to grow, to be challenged, and to thrive.
And this brings us right back to where we started. We just looked at Gatsby in 4 totally different ways: the Marxist, the feminist, the queer theorist, and the eco-critic. They all looked at the same book and saw a completely different truth. Which leaves us with one last fascinating question to think about. Which one of them was right? Or is that even the right question to be asking?